Hey guys, and welcome back for another video. A few months back I made a video of the then upcoming changes to runes and sigils, and since those changes have been in the game since about November 2018, I felt like it was a little overdue on my part to cover those changes, especially when it comes to salvaging and crafting runes and sigils. If you're a bit newer to the game, runes and sigils are upgrade components for your weapons and armor, and you can obtain these upgrades a variety of ways. You can either purchase them from certain vendors, depending on which runes and sigils you're after. You could buy them off the trading post, some could be crafted, and there was a chance, depending on the salvage kit that you were using, to salvage that upgrade component out of a piece of gear containing it. Now with these changes, things do work pretty much that same way. For instance, certain runes and sigils can still only be purchased from vendors in either expansion content or from the dungeon token vendor in Lion's Arch, but barring those upgrades only gotten from vendors, the vast majority of runes and sigils moving forward will probably be crafted, and that's because of some of the changes that went into both crafting runes and sigils as well as salvaging in general. The biggest change impacting this is that you can now salvage runes and sigils directly. At the same time, if you should salvage a piece of gear containing a rune or sigil, that upgrade component will be salvaged at the same time as the gear, meaning from now on, whenever you salvage a piece of gear, you'll no longer be getting any upgrade components. And while on one hand it's really great that you can now salvage all of those items directly and keep your inventory free of any lesser runes and sigils from your blue and green gear, this also means that once all the runes and sigils have been salvaged out of people's inventories and sold on the trading post, all upgrades moving forward will either be crafted or purchased from a vendor. Now when you salvage a piece of gear containing a rune or sigil, you'll get a couple of new crafting materials instead. By salvaging runes or sigils inside of gear, you'll get some lucent motes, and those are the new generic core crafting material for rune and sigil crafting. Even more specifically, if you should salvage a piece of armor containing a rune, you now have a chance, in addition to those lucent motes, to get yourself something called a charm. And along those same lines, if you should salvage a weapon containing a sigil, you now have a chance at a new item called a symbol. Now if you're not quite sure if an item has an upgrade component inside, just know that the name of that item will be slightly different, but you can also just hover your mouse over an item to see if it has an upgrade inside. Both charms and symbols come in 3 separate groups, so if you're looking for a charm, you have a chance to get either the Charm of Brilliance, the Charm of Potence, or the Charm of Skill. And for the symbols, you have a chance at the Symbol of Control, the Symbol of Enhancement, or the Symbol of Pain. Now rather than having these different types of symbols and charms drop from any and all items containing upgrade components, the actual upgrade component inside the item you're salvaging will determine which one of these items you have a chance at getting. If you look at the list of sigils on screen, these are all the sigils in-game that have a chance to drop the Symbol of Control. Being as that it's the Symbol of Control, I originally thought that these would be sigils that had something to do with crowd control, and while for the most part that's pretty true, that's not 100% true throughout. If we look at this list, and more specifically at the Superior Sigil of Water, this item has a chance to drop a Symbol of Control whenever you salvage it, but the effect of that sigil is to heal allies within a certain radius upon landing a critical hit. As you can see, this isn't exactly a crowd control specific sigil, and yet it yields the Sigil of Control. For runes, let's take a look at the Charm of Potence. Looking at nothing but the name, you might again assume this is more of an attack-based or critical-based rune set that you'd be salvaging this charm from, and yet we have the Superior Rune of the Trooper, which focuses vitality and toughness. But again, if you look at that list of runes that you can salvage for a Charm of Potence, you'll notice that several of them actually do follow a potence theme, that being that they follow sort of a power or a crit theme, but since not all of them do, it becomes a little more complicated than I feel like it has to be. If you want to know the kinds of materials you might get out of salvaging a rune or sigil, just hover your mouse over a rune or sigil and it'll tell you. However, the same cannot be said for pieces of gear containing an upgrade. So if you have something that has an upgrade component in it and you hover your mouse over that item, it'll show you the upgrade component but not the item you'll get for salvaging it. For the time being, you can use the trading post as a reference. Since the trading post can be opened anywhere, you can look through the old runes and sigils still being sold from before this update and get an idea of which types of charms and symbols you might get. Given that there are quite a few more variables involved here, I would recommend salvaging your unwanted gear, especially if it's containing an upgrade component, and over time you should accumulate enough of these items to start crafting when you want to. In order to actually craft some of these items, in addition to the materials that you'll need to get somewhat at random, you now also, depending on the rune or sigil you're crafting, will require that rune or sigil's recipe. Certain runes and sigils will be learned automatically, much like with the rest of crafting, and the rest you'll need to actually go and track down the recipe either by looting it, buying it off the trading post, or purchasing it from a specific vendor. The way by which you acquire the recipe will depend on what you're actually trying to craft, so I can't really cover all of the recipes in the game here, but alongside the changes to runes and sigils, they did add several new recipes for some runes and sigils that didn't previously have any, and you'll be able to purchase these from the master crafter vendor for any armor or weapon-based crafting discipline for, you guessed it, some more charms and symbols. The crafting recipes for both runes and sigils are pretty similar, barring a few items that are specific to the item that you're crafting. Both of these upgrade components will now require a new crafting material called the Pile of Lucent Crystal, and these will be refined out of 10 lucent motes that I mentioned earlier. Beyond this common crafting material though, the items do vary depending on the rune or sigil you're trying to craft. Again, runes will require some charms and sigils will require some symbols, but the type of which charm or symbol you use depends on the item you're making. Very similarly, you will need some sort of base crafting material, again based on the item you're crafting. Now for some runes and sigils, this is all there is to the crafting recipe, but there are a fair few that also require ectoplasm in addition to these other items. Globs of ectoplasm, of course, salvaged out of level 68 rare gear or better with a good salvage kit. Now these crafting recipes I'm giving you here are based off of the superior sigil and superior rune, and that's because I really wouldn't recommend crafting any of the lesser versions, as they will take up some of your charms and symbols in the process. Now, if all of this sounded like a bit too much for you to take on, there is one thing you could do instead, and that's use a Black Lion salvage kit to salvage your gear. Both before and after this patch, the Black Lion salvage kit has a 100% chance to salvage upgrades out of gear containing them. Yes, Black Lion salvage kits are a gem store item, but you can actually get these in-game if you're a paid player. Having paid for the core game or either one of the expansions, you'll have access to the daily login reward. Every so many logins, you'll get something called the Chest of Black Lion Goods, and you do have a chance to get a Black Lion salvage kit out of this item. If you're someone who enjoys achievements in Guild Wars 2, every so many achievement points, you'll be awarded with an achievement chest, and that chest also has a chance to drop one of these kits. Now, this method is 100% effective, but the Black Lion salvage kits themselves aren't 100% guaranteed, so I waited until the end of the video to mention this. Since runes and sigils can be crafted and harvested out of gear using the Black Lion salvage kit, you can still find these items on the trading post, but as they're not as common or that they require some new crafting materials in order to make going forward, it's likely we'll see the price of runes and sigils rise slowly but steadily over time. Additionally, you could also purchase lucent motes as well as the charms and symbols of all three types off the trading post, but if you should go this route, be sure to compare the cost of the materials you're trying to buy versus how much that item cost outright. In other words, don't waste your gold on materials when you could just buy the thing you're trying to make in the first place. Now, if you're in no hurry, there's really no reason to fuss around with which items are going to yield which charms and symbols, because you can just salvage all of your gear and eventually you'll end up with the components necessary. That being said, if you're in some sort of hurry, I have to recommend just playing your favorite content that gives you some gold and either purchase those upgrades off the trading post outright, or if you're pretty close to being able to craft it yourself, you could compare the costs of purchasing those crafting materials off the trading post as well. With all of this being said, don't get me wrong, I am very much excited that we can now salvage these upgrade components and have our inventories back essentially. And while I personally like crafting, I know a lot of people out there don't necessarily, and so now having to do that for a lot of these items might not be the most ideal change to the game. But on the whole, I feel like a lot of the confusion surrounding this process could be alleviated if ArenaNet would just patch the game with one simple change. Simply just include the potential drops from upgrade components contained in gear inside of the tooltip. That way, when you hover over a piece of gear containing an upgrade, you not only know that it has that upgrade, but what that upgrade might salvage into. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover here today. I just wanted to let you guys know how those changes to runes and sigils actually change the game. That being said, if I do find a better way to reliably farm certain types of symbols or charms, I'll be sure to let you know in an upcoming video. I'm also considering putting together a video on items that can be only obtained from vendors, so you know which ones you don't necessarily have to craft. But anyway, guys, I hope you found this helpful or informative at the very least. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.